In today's Necron Tactics 2020 video, we're going to talk about Necron Destroyers versus Heavy Destroyers and answer some of the questions I'm always asked. It's coming right up. I love me some Destroyers.
Necrons!
Right, hopefully the bin man won't come yet. Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to keep up to date with all things Necrons, then please subscribe and hit the bell button to turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Now, I get asked a lot of questions about destroyers and heavy destroyers, especially since heavy destroyers came down in points in chapter approved. So I thought I would make a comparison type video of the two units. These videos have always done well on my channel previously, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, then don't forget to press the like button because, well, it really helps me out. Okay, so let's have a chat about these two units. What I'm going to do is put a little picture of each unit up just there, and I'm going to use a tick system as we go through the different stats and abilities of the units so we can come up with some sort of score system. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the cost of the units. Okay, so I'm going to use the Games Workshop website here for the prices. Of course, we know you can buy them cheaper elsewhere. However, Games Workshop charge £30 for a unit of 3 destroyers. We're going to talk about units of 3 here at the beginning of the video. So 3 destroyers, £30. Now, there isn't actually a heavy destroyer model. You have to buy the destroyers and then you have to buy the heavy destroyer upgrade kit, which is £5.50. So it's £30 for 3 destroyers and £46.50 for 3 heavy destroyers, and the upgrade kit is fine cast and it's based on the old metal, very long heavy destroyer gun, which, to be fair, even in metal is quite delicate. So in fine cast I'd imagine it is even more delicate. I don't own one, but that's my assumption because, well, in my experience of fine cast, it's not that great. So in actual fact, I would recommend that you convert your heavy destroyer guns. Not again. You are joking. So I would recommend that you convert your heavy destroyers, probably using the Gauss cannon from your Immortals, where you've made Tesla Immortals. You'll have the Gauss cannons left over, stick 2 of those together and that will give you a heavy Gauss cannon. I'm sure at some point we'll see a new destroyer model and that kit will have both weapon options. However, for now, the destroyers are definitely better value for money and they'll get the first tick. Now, destroyers are a fast attack choice and the heavy destroyers are a heavy support choice. However, the destroyers are able to upgrade one of the models in the unit to a heavy destroyer. And I think maybe that's why there's quite a few questions around destroyers and heavy destroyers. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but first of all I want to talk about the points value. Now, sticking with units of 3 for now, the heavy destroyers come in at 111 points and the destroyers at 150. The maximum size units for heavy destroyers is 3 and destroyers is 6, so you can get more in the unit. However, points wise, for a unit of 3, the heavy destroyers will get the tick. Now, in terms of the data card for these two units, the actual stats themselves are exactly the same, the only difference being the gun. So they can move 10 inches, their strength 4 and toughness 5. They got 3 wounds each with a 3+ save and leadership 10. Their ballistic skill 3 and, believe it or not, weapon skill 3 with 2 attacks. Now that's not amazing, however there used to be weapon skill 4 with 1 attack, so that is quite nice to see, especially on a shooter unit. They have the infantry keyword, meaning that they can be buffed by cryptex, they can also go into buildings, up and down buildings, and indeed through building walls They also have the fly keyword, which is awesome for a shooter unit, so we can fall back and we can still shoot. Not only that, but we can move and shoot our heavy weapons, and both of the weapon options are classed as heavy, so that's very useful. Plus we're able to re-roll the ones to hit, and of course we've got RP. So a lot of positives there for both units. As I said, they've got the same stats. It is the gun, however, which is different. So let's have a look at the guns. So first up is the Gauss cannon on the destroyers, which is 24 inches in range. It has 3 shots and is strength 6. And it's -3 AP with D3 damage. Now the heavy Gauss cannon on the heavy destroyer has a better range. It's 36 inches. It just does 1 shot, however it is strength 9, plus it's -4 AP and does D6 damage. So it's 3 shots for 3 heavy destroyers and 9 shots for 3 destroyers. Now assuming we're not going to buff the unit, which we will talk more about later, for standard shooting we're going to need 3s, the 2s will miss, and the 1s we can re-roll. Assuming we don't re-roll another 1 or a 2, well, we're going to hit quite successfully. However, 9 shots have more chance of hitting a lot more than just 3 shots from the heavy destroyers. So I'm going to give a tick for the amount of shots to the destroyers. However, the heavy destroyers can shoot 36 inches as opposed to 24 inches, so it's going to be a tick for the heavy destroyers for the range. So the strength of the destroyer gun is 6. That means if we shoot at toughness 3, we're going to be wounding on 2s. Most of the time we're going to be shooting at toughness 4 or 5, and that means we're going to be wounding on 3s, which is very nice. Toughness 6, we're going to be wounding on 4s, still doable. And at a push, if we have to shoot at something which is toughness 7 or more, we're going to be wounding on 5s. Now, of course, we do have ways to manipulate the dice. Like I said, we'll talk more about that later. But that's a nice ability of shooting for that gun. Now the strength of the heavy destroyer gun is strength 9. However, we only get 1 shot. These guns are obviously designed for taking out bigger things, high toughness and multiple wounds. The AP -4 and D6 damage also dictates that as well. The thing to bear in mind if you are shooting at something which is big and nasty where the guns can hurt, they're more than likely going to have an invulnerable save bypassing your AP. And of course, more importantly, that is D6 damage. That's very random damage. You could roll well, then you could roll badly. Now whilst the damage on the destroyers is also random and it's only D3, I think overall the quality of a destroyer gun is better than the heavy destroyers, so it's going to be a tick for the destroyers. So side by side, 3 heavy destroyers and 3 destroyers. The destroyers just pip the heavies at the post. Not too much difference, to be fair. However, there is a lot more to be considered when choosing these units. So let's have a closer look at that. So let's have a look at unit size. Now so far we've been comparing units of 3s. That's because heavy destroyers maximum unit size is 3. However, destroyers you can have up to 6 in a unit. Now 6 destroyers of course will cost you more money and more points to put them into your army. However, they can do a serious amount of damage with all of those guns, and they've got more chance to survive than a unit of 3, which means of course you've got a better chance of reanimating them with reanimation protocols. Now don't forget to keep a cryptic nearby so you can reanimate on a 4+ rather than a 5. That makes a huge difference, especially where reanimation protocols is at its most powerful on destroyers, because they have 3 wounds each, and when they stand back up with all 3 wounds. So in terms of unit size, well, the destroyers are going to get a tick for that more survivability and obviously more damage output. Now you could take maybe a unit of 4 or 5, but personally I like to take a unit of 6, the biggest unit I can. And the reason for that is we're going to take full advantage of some of the other things that we can do to help destroyers do what they do best. That's the bin man!
He's at it again! Go on! Bugger off! I'll tell you what, if he looks out those blinds one more time at me, I'm going to get out of this truck and rip his flipping head off.
Then we'll stop recording. Okay, so first of all, and probably most importantly of all, is the stratagem Extermination Protocols. Just 1 CP, and probably our best stratagem in the codex. Exterminate! Good times, yeah! It allows destroyers and heavy destroyers to re-roll the fouled hits and fouled wound dice. Now for destroyers in particular, this is very powerful. Very powerful. Woo! Destroyers don't really have a problem hitting. They've got a good amount of dice and we can re-roll the ones anyway. But to be able to re-roll all of those hits means that we're going to get a good amount of dice hitting, which really helps us when it comes to wounding. So if we're shooting at normal infantry, maybe wounding on 3s, again a good amount of those dice are going to be wounding. However, it's most beneficial when we're targeting stuff with a higher toughness, maybe toughness 7 or 8. When we're wounding on 5s, re-rolling all of those wound dice means we've got a very good chance of getting a good amount of wounds through. And with that -3 AP and D3 damage, it means we're going to put a lot of wounds, a lot of damage on what we're targeting. This stratagem really makes destroyers very powerful indeed, because it means we can target any particular unit that we want, and we've got a good chance of doing a lot of damage on them, especially if we have a big unit of destroyers. Extermination Protocols on units of 3, well, of course it's going to help them, but it's not going to be making the most of the 1 CP you're spending if it's on a unit of 6, where you really are getting the most out of that point. And of course that means that, well, Extermination Protocols on heavy destroyers, whilst again it could be quite useful, well, with 3 dice it's almost wasting that CP. And that, of course, means that Extermination Protocols is going to give the destroyers another tick. If you have a lord nearby your units, well, of course, you can re-roll the ones to wound. That's without using Extermination Protocols. Pretty useful for heavy destroyers. You could also take the Destroyer Lord, allowing you to re-roll the ones to wound as well. Nerd life. You could give your destroyer or heavy destroyer unit My Will Be Done, +1 to hit. Combine that with Extermination Protocols and you're not really going to be missing with that unit. Also very useful if you're not able to use Extermination Protocols, or potentially if you have 2 units, one with Extermination Protocols and one with My Will Be Done. A character with the Veil of Darkness is also very useful for your destroyers. You could hide your destroyers behind a piece of terrain and veil the destroyers out when needed, or you could just use them to position yourself on the table when needed. Now, of course, you could also use the Deceiver to move your destroyers, although that's done at the beginning of the first battle round. You could take the destroyers in the Necron Dynasty using 1 command point and translocation crit stratagem to put them in reserve. Of course, they won't come down until turn 2, but at least on turn 1 they will be safe. If you were in the Sotek Dynasty, you could use Methodological Destruction to give you +1 to hit. Very useful if you have 2 units of destroyers, because of course you can only use Extermination Protocols once per term. Now, talking of dynasties, this is another big asset for both destroyers and heavy destroyers, in that they can basically operate without needing a dynasty to work, because, well, we already re-roll the ones, we've got all of those buffs that we've just talked about. We don't necessarily need a particular dynasty to do the job, well, apart from maybe if you want to hold a unit in reserve. Now of course you can upgrade one of your destroyers for a heavy destroyer, and I'm asked quite often, is this worth doing? Now there certainly are some advantages to this. I mean, it gives you the ability to split fire with that single heavy destroyer gun, maybe shoot something which is further away. It gives you an extra anti-tank weapon with that D6 damage. And of course, if you do use Extermination Protocol on the unit of destroyers, well, your heavy destroyer will get that ability as well. Now of course, heavy destroyers only have 1 shot compared to 3 from the destroyers, so even though they're less strength and less AP and potentially less damage, of course it's random, the 3 shots from the destroyers when Extermination Protocols are in use, giving you the rerolls and rerolls, you've actually got more chance of doing more damage with a destroyer than you do a heavy destroyer in that unit. So I would actually say it's not worth it, except for when you're playing smaller point games. In smaller point games you don't tend to have so much anti-tank weapons on the table, especially if you're playing really small games, maybe 500 points or 750 points. So having a heavy destroyer amongst your destroyer unit is really useful. You can pick off targets and split fire. However, for bigger point games where you've got your anti-tank on the table, I really don't think it's worth having a heavy destroyer amongst the units unless you're really pinching for points and you just need to drop a few points from the list. Otherwise, I would definitely go full destroyers. Now to be fair, we're only talking about heavy destroyers here being a viable unit because of the points reductions that we had in chapter approved, now 111 points. They were previously 150 points, and at that points level, well, we wouldn't even be making this video, but 111 points, well, things are a bit different. I think that we should be able to make room in most of our lists to get a unit of heavy destroyers in there. A unit of 3 would give you some extra anti-tank, it will complement your Doomsday arcs quite nicely, and where they're quite a small unit, you can hide them at turn 1 pretty successfully. They have that extra range that maybe you could be lacking in some of your other army, and if the unit gets wiped out, well, you've only lost 111 points. So based on what you get for your points, I am going to give the heavy destroyers another tick. So destroyers win our little battle, and to be fair, it's probably not surprising. You know, they can do a lot of damage and they will be top target priority for your opponent if they know what's good for them. So don't be surprised to see your destroyers go down very quickly. As I said, we can hold them in reserve if you take them in the right dynasty. You can try to hide them if you're able to, or you could maybe do what I'm doing in my new Necron list, and that's taking 2 units of destroyers. So if one does die, or at least I have another one on the table. Now if you want more details of my new Necron 2020 list, I'll put a video for you just up there, and if you want to see another comparison video like this one, then I'm sure you'll enjoy that video just there. Beam me up!